speed as a weapon. In war, survival is usually measured in millimeters, millimeters of steel, millimeters of armor, the difference between penetration and deflection. During the Second World War, most armies believed that victory on the battlefield belonged to the heaviest machine, the tank with the thickest armor, the largest gun, and the most imposing presence. Germany embraced this philosophy fully. The Tiger, the Panther, rolling fortresses designed to dominate through raw strength. The United States chose something radically different. Instead of building a tank that could survive being hit, American engineers asked a more dangerous question. What if the tank was never hit at all? The answer was the M18 Hellcat. On paper, it looked like a mistake. Thin armor, open turret, minimal protection. Against German heavy tanks, it seemed suicidal. Yet by the end of the war, the Hellcat would achieve the highest kill ratio of any American armored vehicle, destroying more enemy tanks than it lost, not by standing its ground, but by refusing to play by the enemy's rules. This was not a story of brute force. It was a story of speed. At nearly 88 kilometers per hour, the Hellcat was the fastest tracked armored vehicle of the entire war. Faster than tanks, faster than most armored cars, faster than the assumptions of German doctrine itself. Its crews did not think in terms of armor thickness or defensive positions. They thought in terms of angles, timing, and escape routes. For Hellcat crews, survival depended on one principle: movement is life. They did not trade shots. They did not hold ground. They appeared, struck, and vanished. Against them stood some of the most feared machines ever built, German heavy tanks whose guns could destroy any American vehicle with a single hit. Tanks designed for dominance in frontal combat, where armor and firepower decided everything. But these machines had limits. Limits of speed, limits of rotation, limits of reaction, and those limits would be exploited mercilessly. From the frozen forests of the Ardennes to the open valleys of Italy, Hellcat units transformed mobility into a tactical advantage so overwhelming that German commanders routinely misjudged their numbers. A handful of fast-moving vehicles could create the illusion of an entire armored division. Confusion spread. Engagements broke down. Heavy tanks were destroyed without ever firing an effective shot. This documentary explores how that happened, how American doctrine deliberately sacrificed armor for speed, how mechanical weaknesses in German turrets turned into fatal flaws, how hit-and-run tactics rewrote armored warfare in real time, and how a vehicle that should not have survived on paper became one of the most lethal tank destroyers of the war. The story of the Hellcat is not about protection. It is about initiative. It is about understanding that in modern warfare, control of time and space can be deadlier than steel, that the fastest force dictates the terms of battle, and that sometimes the most fragile machine on the field is the most dangerous one. This is the story of a tank that survived not by resisting fire, but by outrunning it. Speed versus armor. During the Second World War, tank design followed a brutal logic. Thicker armor meant greater survival. Most armies believed that protection was the key to dominance on the battlefield. The heavier the tank, the safer the crew. Germany embodied this philosophy with machines like the Tiger and the Panther, steel monsters built to absorb punishment and dominate head-on engagements. The United States chose a radically different path. The M18 Hellcat was not designed to survive hits, it was designed to avoid them. At a time when most armored vehicles struggled to reach 40 kilometers per hour, the Hellcat could achieve an astonishing 88 kilometers per hour, 55 miles per hour, making it the fastest tracked armored vehicle of the war. This speed was not an accident. It was a deliberate trade-off, achieved by sacrificing nearly all protective armor. With just 13 millimeters of steel on its hull, the Hellcat was vulnerable to almost any anti-tank weapon on the battlefield. Heavy machine guns, artillery fragments, even infantry carried weapons at close range. In a direct duel, it was outmatched by virtually every German tank it might encounter. Yet this apparent weakness was the Hellcat's greatest strength. American engineers understood that survivability did not necessarily mean resisting enemy fire. It could also mean never being where the enemy was aiming. The Hellcat embodied a doctrine of movement, initiative, and surprise. Its crews were trained not to slug it out, but to strike first, reposition instantly, and vanish before retaliation. This philosophy fundamentally changed how tank destroyers operated. The Hellcat's lightweight allowed rapid acceleration, sharp turns, and exceptional cross-country mobility. Crews could exploit terrain, roads, fog, and darkness to control the engagement. Instead of anchoring a defensive line, they hunted. Instead of holding ground, they denied it. In combat, this translated into a simple but deadly principle: speed equals survival. German tank crews, accustomed to slow-moving opponents, suddenly faced enemies that appeared, fired, and disappeared before they could react. A Hellcat might expose itself for only a few seconds, just long enough to deliver a single 76mm round before racing out of sight. The cost of this speed was absolute vulnerability. Any mistake was fatal. There was no margin for error, no armor to forgive hesitation. Hellcat crews lived on a razor's edge, where discipline, coordination, and timing mattered more than steel thickness. But when used correctly, the Hellcat rewrote the rules of armored combat. It demonstrated that tanks did not need to be invincible, only unpredictable. That control of distance and tempo could defeat superior firepower, and that mobility, in the hands of skilled crews, could turn fragility into dominance. This was not brute force warfare, it was kinetic warfare, and it set the stage for one of the most asymmetrical armored confrontations of the war, where speed would repeatedly humiliate armor that was thicker, heavier, and far slower. The fatal weakness of German turrets. German heavy tanks inspired fear across every battlefield they entered. The Tiger and the Panther were symbols of dominance: thick frontal armor, powerful guns, and reputations built on direct confrontation. But beneath that image of invincibility lay a critical mechanical weakness, one that fast American crews learned to exploit with ruthless efficiency. The Achilles heel was not the gun, it was the turret. Unlike many Allied designs, the turrets of German tanks relied heavily on engine-driven hydraulic systems for rotation. This meant turret speed was directly tied to engine revolutions. At full throttle, rotation was acceptable, but in combat conditions, when tanks moved slowly, halted to fire, or maneuvered cautiously, turret rotation slowed dramatically. For the Panther, rotating the turret 90 degrees could take between 15 and 20 seconds at low engine speed. On paper, this delay seemed manageable. In reality, it was catastrophic. The battlefield was no longer static. Fast vehicles like the M18 Hellcat exploited time as a weapon. While a German gunner waited for the turret to swing, a Hellcat traveling at 50 kilometers per hour could reposition over 200 meters, slipping out of the firing arc entirely. This created a lethal mismatch. German tanks were designed for frontal engagements, long-range duels where armor thickness mattered. Their crews trained to face threats head-on, adjust position, then fire decisively. But the Hellcat refused to play that game. It attacked from unexpected angles, changed direction constantly, and never stayed exposed long enough for the turret to catch up. Even when a Panther spotted a Hellcat first, the engagement was far from guaranteed. The gunner had to track a target moving faster than anything else on the battlefield, while the turret lagged behind reality. By the time the gunner lined, the target was already gone, or firing into the tank's weaker side armor. This mechanical limitation turned German armor into a paradox, incredibly powerful, yet slow to respond. Crews reported intense frustration. The enemy seemed omnipresent and invisible at the same time. Engagements became reactive rather than controlled. Heavy tanks were forced into defensive postures, rotating hulls instead of turrets, a slow, exhausting process that further exposed their flanks. The Hellcat did not need thicker armor or a bigger gun. It only needed time, and German turrets could not keep up. Hit-and-run tactics at Bastogne. The Battle of the Bulge provided the perfect environment for the Hellcat to prove its doctrine. Snow, forests, narrow roads, and dense fog stripped visibility and compressed engagements. Heavy German armor, designed for open terrain and deliberate advances, suddenly found itself blind. Near Neuville, during the fighting around Bastogne, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion turned speed into a psychological weapon. Hellcat crews operated like predators. Using fog and terrain as cover, they maneuvered constantly, avoiding static positions. They did not wait for German tanks to approach. They stalked them. When contact was made, it lasted seconds, never minutes. A Hellcat would burst into view, fire a single 76mm round into the Panther's vulnerable side armor, then immediately reverse at high speed. Before the German turret could rotate, the American vehicle was already gone, relocating for another strike. This was not luck, it was choreography. Crews trained relentlessly to fire, reverse, and reposition without hesitation. Commands were minimal, movements were rehearsed. Every second mattered. The Hellcat's open turret improved visibility, allowing commanders to spot threats and opportunities faster than enclosed German crews. German after-action reports reveal the confusion this caused. Panzer units reported being attacked by what they believed were entire armored formations, when in reality they were facing only a handful of vehicles cycling through positions at extreme speed. The fog amplified the effect. Shots came from different angles, at irregular intervals. Tanks were hit, withdrew, then were struck again minutes later from another direction. It felt omnipresent. For German crews, the battlefield became disorienting. There was no clear enemy front, no stable engagement. Every halt invited another strike. The Hellcats paid a price when mistakes were made. Their thin armor offered no forgiveness. But discipline compensated for fragility. Units that maintained coordination suffered minimal losses while inflicting disproportionate damage. At Bastogne, the Hellcat proved something profound. Armored warfare was no longer about armor alone. It was about tempo, perception, and initiative. The faster force controlled the narrative of the battle, and the slower one bled.